Okay, thanks for that. We're going to hear from both groups. So with this group, starting with the worst possible outcomes of addressing discrepancy in high school enrollment, Trustee Lucine, if you just want to share out what you heard on worst possible outcomes.
Well, I will try, yes, thank you. Um, uh, One was just, common comment was just creating some community anger or displeasure with their kids having to move. Or if they have, family may end up having students at two different high schools. That was one, and then one was moving teachers, having to move teachers depending on what the boundary is going to be like and what's needed at different schools. And then what comments, how will this affect the sports activity population, kind of what it's going to do with that. And if I missed anything, people can chime in. And then one was just making sure that since we just did this about 6 years ago or so, we established Gallatin High and going through that process and just wondering, making sure that that's explained, how that process was done, and that the community will have some trust in how we're formulating a different boundary for the high schools, which is difficult to project, but do the best we can.
Thank you. Trustee Moran. Worst possible outcomes.
Feel free to chime in if we don't create two equitable schools. The time and energy that it takes and draining our staff, perceived affects the kids, emotions. One high school is better than the other high school. Nobody likes change. Lack of community support. We don't get it right. Equity is perceived. Division created impacts quality, divides families between two schools, and admin management process difficult to manage.
Thank you. Trustee Lucine, now if you move on to best possible outcomes of addressing the discrepancy.
Okay, best possible outcome. Some similar was just bringing the topic to the attention from all stakeholders, key stakeholders in the process, parents and students for sure involved in the process, and just establishing stable and consistent education at both high schools. And the kids in the school boundaries go to their home school, able to predict long-term growth enrollment in each school, social economic equality representation in each school, making sure each school has equal opportunities. One was matching, making sure it's through the process that we're able to match middle school enrollment to the high school boundaries. And achieve neighborhood schools, possibly save on bus costs. And that's it.
Creates more opportunity in individual learning at both schools. All of our issues are addressed. Balances out the school population. 2 comprehensive balanced sites. Process of change will increase trust, garner community support. Enrollment process will be easier to manage. We get it right. Continue to innovate and grow as a district. helps with overcrowding, and change the SMS CJ boundaries to create true feeder schools.
Okay, Trustee Lucine, if district administration was tasked with building a process, what should be considered in designing that process to address any high school boundary changes?
We had address socioeconomic equity, projected areas of population growth, school population equity. All BSD kids are in the center of the room in the discussion. Community involvement, growth. Where are the K-12 students moving from into our high schools? How full should each school be now versus 10 years? Study of growth patterns existing K-12 students, 2 to 3 solutions to bring forward, and consensus of stakeholders of boundaries, growth directions in our surrounding elementaries, and focus on a quality education for all students.
Thank you, Trustee Moran.
A consensus process, opportunities for stakeholders to represent and community feedback, consensus with a small c in front of it. PR for this is careful, it's important and thoughtful. Surveys to stakeholders, district resources. We have a lot going on. It could be a huge time source. Fix the feeder school pattern. Diversity is valued, not just present.
Thank you. Mr. Van Buren, if you go to the next slide. What you have on the screen is a recommendation after Executive Cabinet has talked about high school boundaries, and with our high school administrators, both Dan and Erica are very supportive of moving forward with a process to help alleviate the discrepancy in boundaries, and that Gallatin High School is in essence full, and that we have capacity at Bozeman High School. We've also taken into account in this recommendation everything that's going on in the district. You're going to hear a little more this morning around the long-range strategic plan, in particular 2 goals that we haven't addressed prior, so staff well-being and student well-being. Both of those goals we anticipate are going to be a significant lift in time and resources for the district. So the recommendation that we want both groups to churn on is that we would move forward during the 24-25 school year with looking at high school boundaries. And that process would include some front-end work, analysis, and draft changes by a small task force. That's what we meant by small C consensus. So you'd have a group of experts look at the data, pull together some options, and then bring together a small-scale consensus process with stakeholders, including staff, parents, students. Then it would go, some recommendations out of that small-scale consensus would go to the large-scale survey process so that the full community can weigh in, and ultimately a formal recommendation to the board by spring break. Timeline is to be determined. The timeline is largely tied to when does the high school need it? When do they need that decision made so they can look at enrollment for the following year? As you know, when we talk about budgets related to the high school timeline, they start scheduling early and earlier all the time, it feels like. So that timeline may need to move up prior to spring break. But that is from Executive Cabinet, from the superintendent, sort of our recommendation that one, we would start the process to fix the high school boundaries, and that those are some of the key components. What I'd like you to wrestle with in your groups is, can you support, where are you at in supporting that recommendation? Yay or nay? If you're get consensus around the yes or no part, then are those the right pieces of the puzzle to have in place, or are we missing some glaring pieces for process? Again, if you discuss and then have one person ready to share out. Thank you. Trustee Lucine, are you the spokesman for that group again? No? Oh, Chair Neal, let's hear it.
I'm trying to adjust myself here. There we go. Feel like I talked too much already, so I don't know why I'm the spokesperson, but the first item that we discussed was I heard completely conflicting thoughts about the middle schools and the philosophy of how they feed into our high schools and whether we should go back to a feeder system where all of one middle school goes here and all of the other one goes here. The language that Lacey used was we're slowly getting away from one Bozeman. The farther we get away from, the farther we come out of when we opened Gallatin High School. So does it make sense to have feeder schools, or does it make sense to have a blend and a mix where kids grow up together and then they kind of go like this when they get done with 8th grade? The next item was, do we just not redistrict right now and instead adjust facilities, meaning add on to Gallatin High School? And as a sub bullet point of that, how long will the redistrict last if we draw a new line? How long will it last? I don't think that question is answerable right now. The next item was how would consolidation affect this conversation with rural schools? And specifically regarding kids from those attendance boundary areas going to our high schools. The next item is this, in some ways can be simplified. It's a data process. So take all the data points, the free and reduced lunch, and everything that we know about we know where all of our kids live in the Bozeman school district. And take all the factors attached to those kids and simply just use the data to draw a line. In 6 years ago, when we went through this process, one of the factors we used was building permits and using that as a projection of growth. And one difference between today and 6 or 7 years ago was building permits do not directly translate to where kids live now, and they did a little bit more directly translate to where kids lived back then because of what's changed in Bozeman. The last bullet point that I wrote down was full schools are our most efficient method of what am I trying to say here? It's our most efficient method of doing what we do. So ideally, do we have equality in bringing both schools up to whatever that percentage of capacity is, both schools up to 95% or whatever that looks like.
Just when we were talking about the middle schools feeding into each high school, when I think back when we were on that committee, I don't know if they were split out just because the boundary felt that way or if it was part of philosophy, but we were talking about maybe is that a core thing that we believe should happen? Or should it just be a boundary and kids before we go to this? Or can that be decided within that? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Chair Neal, did your group come to any sort of consensus on whether we should convene the process in 24-25 to change boundaries or not?
I don't know that we specifically got to that point. Would you like to give us a couple more minutes?
Yes, please.
Let's just go around the circle. Okay. We have full consensus. Couple pendings. Pending we pending we consider the core issue of the middle school topic. And yes, it's necessary. We're thumbs up.
Thank you.
We are all thumbs up over here. One concern was the timeline of the spring break date for 2025, because they do register for classes in February. And then the other one was the transition piece to similar what was done before, was the 3 options of the different boundary lines with the survey going out to parents.
I would just clarify on the transition piece is just the process that we went through on the transition committee 6 years ago. I feel like what's outlined here is pretty similar to that process. There were just a lot more details in the transition committee, so I feel like this process is very similar.
Okay, thank you. I'm hearing that we're moving forward and that in the process, middle school topics, middle school feeder patterns, the timeline, and then transition pieces. Anytime we've gone through boundary changes, particularly K5, K8, there's some phase in and some grandfathering, and that group will have to figure all of that out. But it sounds like we're moving forward. Okay, yes.
Vice Chair Black reminded me that I did not take public comment after our first discussion item. I think after each of these bullet points, I will. Is there any public comment on what we just discussed the last 30 minutes? Okay. Do you want us to come back to our seats?
No, you can stay where you're at, as
Okay.
long as you can see the screen. The next part of this conversation is elementary and middle school boundaries, so K-8 boundaries. What you see on the screen there are our 2 middle schools. Chief Joseph, it's important to note both schools have capacity. We've seen generally flat enrollment trends and predictions at our middle schools and declining enrollment at our K-5 schools. So if you play that out, there continues to be room in both of our middle schools. With the remodel that happened at Sacagawea, that bumped up their capacity, so they have more room than CJ. Similar to the high school, we have a variety of transfers that go back and forth that generally offset themselves. If you move to the next slide, those are K-8 schools. Again, the black line is functional capacity. You see Emily Dickinson on the left, and we consistently hear from Emily Dickinson that it feels very full. A reminder on the elementary K-5, back to when we talked about looking at our K-5 schools as the airplanes and hangars, that it generally feels full everywhere because we're filling all of our classrooms to accreditation standards or above. So what capacity looks like is generally open classrooms in those schools, but the open classroom doesn't alleviate stress because everything's full. So you see that the black line is a taller bar than every other line up there, so we have functional capacity all over our school district. K-5, Irving and Whittier are noticeable, and in recent years, Morningstar having significant capacity. Morningstar should have an asterisk on it because we did add 6 early literacy classrooms, 4 4-year-old classrooms, and move both SPED pre-K programs over to there. Move to the next slide. We feel at Executive Cabinet as a team that K-8 boundaries are complicated. very complicated. And there's a lot of things to consider. One is open enrollment. We lived open enrollment year one. It was a very tight 1 month timeline in January. We have heard from quite a few families that missed the timeline, missed the boat on being able to move through that process. We did not open that up as an exceptional circumstance to allow them to move through the process. So we would anticipate year two. It's hard to predict, but we do know that year one was pretty much a non-factor for us. We had some kids come in, we had some kids leave, and it wasn't a significant percentage either way. Targeted early literacy expansion. Currently 4 regular classrooms at Morningstar that we're going to open. That's an increase from 2 Running Start programs to 4. If we looked at the data assigned to that, remember those kids can only attend that program if they move through the literacy assessment process. Our assessment data shows that we could open 8 classrooms. And so there could be an expansion of that program moving forward. That again, things are tricky because Morningstar doesn't have room for 4 more. So we would be looking at a second site or be looking at a reconfiguration using one of our elementary sites as a possible K-8 or a pre-K attendance center. Legislative changes 2025, hard to know what the legislature is going to do. What we have heard, and I will echo this later, from the Education Interim Committee and the Education Budget Committee Interim is that funding formula changes are going to be churned on in the 25 session. It's also a decennial year, and the legislature is tasked with responding to that decennial piece of the funding formula that they have to look at every 10 years. Also, we've heard clearly from the Budget Interim Education Committee that school district organization, in terms of consolidation, annexation, how many public school districts are in Montana, will be churned on in the 25 session. Lou Jones provided a lot of detailed data on, for example, Nevada and Idaho and Wyoming that have similar numbers of public schools, but significantly fewer school districts. Number 4, K-5 school closure. You lived this during the budget reduction process. Moving from 8 to 7 schools is highly emotional for many involved, for loss of identity. And there's this notion that are we moving from 8 to 7 schools based upon our enrollment trends, or are we reconfiguring boundaries to keep 8 schools? And do either of those items make sense? School site personnel and parent angst. You heard this at both at the Whittier and at the Irving board luncheons, that within the parent community and within the teaching staff at both of those sites, the unknown of whether they will have a school or not with their name on it in the future causes stress. And so having being able to communicate proactively that yes, we're pursuing boundary changes during this school year, K-8, or no, we're not, will give them some more assurance. And then additional external needs for space. I think it was 2 years ago, the Long Range Facility Planning Group worked through facilities needs assessment. At the time, special education space, particularly day treatment options, was prioritized in that long-range facility plan. There are 2 things going on concurrently right now. So Gallatin County received a large planning grant to look at regional day treatment special education programs. Chad Berg's been very involved in that. No decisions have been made, but they've explored a variety of options and funding models for that. At the same time, we've made some changes at the Wilson to move the middle school and high school day treatment program under this roof. So we'll have all K-12 kids in BSD 7 day treatment in this building. And then community daycare interests. It's been a ongoing conversation in the community. It's been a more recent conversation at the Bozeman Chamber of Commerce about community daycare interests and what is the role of the local school district who has capacity in their K-8 schools to expand daycare opportunities. Okay. There is a lot going. What I want to point you to is every one of those has some unknown to it. And there's a lot of things going on in our K-8 boundaries discussion to make this a much more, I feel it's less clear cut on what we do with K-8 boundaries. We'll get to the recommendation later, but similar to the last process, 3 questions. If you move to the next screen. Considering the factors discussed on the previous slide, and we'll move back to that slide in a minute, what are the worst possible outcomes of not making changes? Considering factors discussed on previous slide, what are the best possible outcomes of not making changes? And then are there any other factors that district administration should be aware of when considering when to address our K-8 boundaries? Mr. Van Buren, if you go back to the previous slide and then go ahead. Think, write, discuss. Thank you. Mr. Van Buren, if you go to the next slide. We're going to streamline this a little bit. So the recommendation is that from Executive Cabinet is that the Board of Trustees task us to continue to monitor all relevant factors related to K-8 enrollment, but that we not convene a K-8 boundary change process during the 24-25 school year. You can take any of the information that you've collected in those three questions in your consensus discussion, but really want to hear from both groups, trustees in particular, where you're at with that recommendation.
We're ready when you are. Okay, our worst outcomes. Sorry, hang on. That's what we're talking about, right? Yeah, worst, best. Our worst outcomes were overfull buildings, operational efficiencies remain. That would be a best outcome. Operational inefficiencies remain. Perception between locations / false perceptions between locations of other locations. Missed opportunities for programming, such as what we have with early literacy. Community misunderstanding. Continuing parent and teacher frustration with the higher enrollment in certain buildings. Teachers unsure of where they will be teaching. We're forced to close an elementary school. Efficiency of scale are not maximized. We already had that one. Do you want me to do all of ours or just the worst right now?
If you just want to summarize any of those items related to this question, where you're at consensus-wise.
On the question, on the recommendation, we have full consensus of support.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Moran. You can just summarize where we're at.
Sorry. We feel like it's not a priority, but always keep it in the back of our mind, and we agree with Casey's decision.
Okay, the next one, there's a lot more information. I have Mr. Waterman walk you through it. Get a place you're comfortable looking at the screen, because there's quite a few slides related to this.
And before we do that, I'll ask for any public comment from members of the public. No public comment? Okay.
While Mr. Waterman's getting ready for this, I want trustees to know that we did, related to this school district organization conversation, we did reach out to all of our feeder K-8s, superintendents, and to John Nielsen, the county superintendent, letting him know we were having this conversation. This is really coming to you as more information. When we started hearing Lou Jones and the interim budget committee start talking about consolidation, which has been really sort of a taboo bad word related to Montana public schools, But as that committee starting to look at efficiencies in school district operations, comparing Montana and per pupil funding in Montana to other states, and then taking that next step and looking at the number of districts versus the number of schools, we thought our trustees should fully be in the loop on what it means, what the current law is, what would happen, and how it happens in Montana law.
All right. Good morning, trustees. Am I on? Good to go. All right. Good to see you all. This school district organization has been a taboo topic. It's uncomfortable, certainly for a lot of people. Our goal here is just to walk you through the mechanics of it, why it could be a conversation for our district going forward, and just give you some background information as we move forward. Let me get this going here. Dessert first. This is the discussion questions that you're going to be talking about that we want to make sure that you're comfortable with, and things that you should be paying attention to as we go through this conversation. Just to be clear on the outset, it's not within the prerogative of this board to initiate any of the consolidation or annexation questions. So there's nothing that this district can do as a first step towards these conversations. So it's not an action item for you now. It won't be an action item unless there's a grassroots effort within these other districts to make it one for you. So it's a discussion item now and forever and until that happens. I should also tell you that we've included it as a part of the district boundary discussion. District boundaries are external to our organization. Where districts line up as external, we've included it in this boundary conversation and internal conversation, because if the district external boundaries were ever to change, there would be significant impacts on our internal boundaries as well. There's a lot of other places that these district organization conversations fit into our normal day-to-day business. It's a little bit of a elephant in the room in a lot of conversations. This is one place it fits in with this boundary conversation, so that's why we're bringing it to you today. Things we want you to look for, we're going to again talk about best and worst possible outcomes of having these conversations locally. We want to talk about the role of the Board of Trustees and district administration in these conversations, and then how should the possibility of future annexations factor into our internal school boundary discussions, bringing that back full circle under the agenda item, which it's listed on there. We tend to think of where we're at as the final step, like we're at the apex of evolution and nothing's ever going to change past us. We're at the final place where we're going to be, and I would like to suggest to you that maybe that's not the case. I put up a picture here. This is looking from about where I would say 19th and College back towards MSU, which was Montana State College back in 1954. Just by way of reference, this is Montana Hall here. Romney is over here. Trustee Neal, I think you were a freshman in 1954. Your dorm room was probably right in, no, I don't know where that was, but obviously a lot's changed. And then if you look back behind you would be back towards the interstate. You wouldn't see an interstate back then. I-90 didn't exist in 1954. It wasn't put in until 1957. So a lot of changes happened in our community, and I want to point your attention to, as you look further out here, this open space. What you don't see out here is the brick. You don't see Bobcat Stadium or the parking garage or any of the houses that are currently out there now, streets. There's nothing out there. This is the situation that the school district was in at the time the Bozeman High School District was formed. That picture was 1954. 1957, the Bozeman High School District was formed with its current boundaries. So if you think about that picture, you look about all that open space, you think about transportation, you think about how long it would take to get from our district or from MSU now across town, across the valley, to some of the places that are fully developed at this point in time. A lot has changed in the last 70 years or so. When the Bozeman High School District was formed, it was comprised of what was called common elementary districts back then. They're now called elementary districts. There was 25 of them. If you look down that list of districts that existed in 1957, those elementary districts, you see some common names, some places that you're probably familiar with, places that obviously don't have schools anymore. And over that last 70 years or so, that those 25 elementary districts have collapsed down to the remaining 8. The ones that are highlighted are the only ones that exist at this point in time today. All the rest of them have since been annexed or consolidated for one reason or another, whether they ran out of enrollment, whether they grew together with another little sub-community at that point in time, whether they had budget issues, I don't know. I talked to Steve about this in his tenure, so he was here for 35,000 years. 35 years or so. He wasn't part of any of the other annexations outside of Ophir when Ophir and Big Sky became one back in 2007 or 2008. So it's been a while since we've dealt with an annexation issue or a consolidation in our community. But the question that we have is what's the future? And is there a case for change now or at some point in the near future with regards to these district structures as our district and our community and our valley all continue to evolve? And that's where we're headed with the conversation this morning. This is a map of Gallatin County on the far right. You see the line going through the middle of that is Interstate 90. The different colors represent different high school districts. So everything in red kind of in the middle from here all the way down over to here, everything in red is a Bozeman High School District feeder elementary. And I've expanded that picture down at the bottom so you can see kind of the core of it. It doesn't, this bigger exploded version doesn't show you the top of the Sedan district up here, and it doesn't show you the bottom of the Gallatin Gateway School District down at the bottom. But it explodes out so you can see a little bit more detail of those 8 existing elementary districts. Malmberg is up Bozeman Pass. Our school district, Bozeman Elementary, goes all the way from the Park County line. It goes down through this little tiny little walkway that we've got right down here just south of Montforton, all the way out to where you take out with your inner tubes floating the Madison. So our school district is the largest geographically of them all. And then obviously it feeds into the Bozeman High School District. Cottonwood Elementary down here at the bottom. If you go all the way out Cottonwood Road, and then when it starts getting to the turns, before you go Cottonwood Canyon, that's where Cottonwood School District is. Anderson Elementary is out Cottonwood before you get to the Cottonwood School District. Montforton is here. Malmberg is over to the right, and then Sedan, those kids are past Battle Ridge. Those kids go up to the Shields Valley School District because that's a geographical barrier for them to cross in the winter. So that's the current status of where things are at. And our next step in the process is to just talk about some terms so we understand what exactly we are talking about. Consolidation and annexation are sometimes used interchangeably, but they're different structures. Consolidation is where you have 2 smaller districts. I put them up there as District A and B. They come together. Neither district, neither A or B exists going forward, but a new District C is formed out of them. So Districts A and B cease to exist, and a new District C grows out of them. That's what you saw. Some of the most recent ones were Dutton Brady up along I-15. Was a consolidation. Those are similar sized communities coming together and creating a new school district, which they call Dutton Brady, for consolidation purposes. We are not in that situation. Based on the size difference, which I'll get into between our elementary district in Bozeman and our rural elementary districts, we're not in a position to be able to consolidate under state law. Rather, we would be looking at an annexation. And annexation is where District A is the larger district. District B would be the smaller district. District A is the annexing district. District B is the district to be annexed. District B ceases to exist. And then District A just becomes larger. So all of the assets owned by District B would become assets of District A. All of the tax base from District B becomes tax base of District A. Enrollment, everything about District A becomes a part of everything as part of District B becomes part of District A. These, in order to annex, you'd have to have a different classification size. I won't bore you too much with that. That has to do with the population of the school district, not enrollment, but population. And that's why under state law, annexation would be the option that we would be looking at if there was a district reorganization here in Bozeman. Some requirements, and these are important because Well, I'll explain. First of all, the districts must be contiguous. In order to annex a district, you have to share a boundary with it. You can't create an island. The Bozeman School District, for example, couldn't annex Three Forks because we don't share a boundary or create an island, and that's just not permissible. The other thing that's very important for you to know is that there's an election required for the disappearing district. Whatever district was to disappear, the folks that live in that district would have to request either by through their local school board or by petition. They would have to request an election, and then they would have to approve it. That's important because essentially Bozeman can't invade or take over a school district without their approval, consent, and desire to become a part of the school district. We can't line up our buses at the boundary and take them over in the night or anything like that. It would have to be their desire and intent to join our district, which makes it a little bit of a odd conversation for our board to have at this point, and we'll get into that in a second more. If there is an annexation, if a smaller district were to vote to annex into Bozeman, you all would have to approve that. So the requirement would be that the district to be annexed, their voters would approve it, and the annexing district, their board of trustees would vote to approve it, okay? Voters in the district to be annexed and the board from the annexing district would all have to approve it in order to happen. There's a question of bonded indebtedness when you issue bonds, and I won't get into this too much because it doesn't matter but at this point, but there would have to be a discussion and decision about whether existing bonds would be paid by the entire larger district or if each district would still pay on the bonds that were issued prior to the annexation. An important detail, but one we don't need to dig into too much at this point in time. The thing that you need to take away from this slide is we'd be looking at an annexation, so the Bozeman High School District, the Bozeman Elementary District would continue to exist. The district to be annexed would not, but it would be their voters' desire and intent to join our district for this to happen. Super important that you know that. We can't take over a district. That's not the structure that's provided for in law. Questions so far? All right. I showed you a map just a minute ago of the geography associated with our high school district, all the districts in red. I want to break that down and show it as more of a pie chart. So in the next couple of graphs, the outline black represents the Bozeman High School District, the size of the tax base within our district. Oh, gosh. Thank you. Within the Bozeman High School District exists, again, 8 elementary districts, Bozeman being the largest. Our high school taxable value for the year that we just left is $434 million. The Bozeman Elementary District is $357 million of that 434, 82% of the value of the tax base in the Bozeman High School District is within the Bozeman Elementary District. The remaining 18% is within the other 7 elementary districts. Montforton is the largest of those remainers. Shown here in red, that's 9%. Gallatin Gateway is the green, that's 4%. Anderson is the purple, that's 2%, and all the others combined represent 3% of that remaining tax base. I use Montforton as an example for the very simple fact that it's right next door to us on the graph. So don't read anything into that besides the fact that I just needed an example for this slide here. So there's a taxpayer with the star that currently lives within the Montforton School District and within the Bozeman High School District, right? See that? That's before annexation. If we were to annex Montforton, that taxpayer would become a taxpayer within the Bozeman Elementary District and also stay within the Bozeman High School District. Again, just an example because they're right next door to each other on the pie graph. Does that make sense? So, which brings us to the question of scope. And this is one of the core questions I showed you at the start and one I'd like you to wrestle with when we get to the end of the presentation here. The constituents in Montforton, Gateway, Anderson, Lamont, Cottonwood, Malmborg, and Sedan, they are all within your high school district boundaries. They elect the high school board of trustees and they pay taxes to the Bozeman High School trustees. Raise your hand if you are a trustee of the Bozeman High School District. everybody's hand should go up, because you guys are all trustees for the Bozeman High School District. You make decisions for the Bozeman High School District. These taxpayers, and I'll go back one slide, the star on in Montforton, they're taxpayers, voters in the Montforton School District now, or Gateway, or Anderson, or any of those other 7 there. Raise your hand if you are a trustee on the Montforton, Gateway, Anderson, Lamont, Cottonwood, or Malmberg boards. No one. Okay, so there's a question of how much authority, what your jurisdiction is over this type of question, and it's something tough that's to wrestle with, because we're not looking to invade a school district, we're not looking to take over, but there's reasons that we'll go through that it makes sense for us to have these conversations. I talked to Lance Melton at some length before we had this meeting about what the Bozeman School District's board, what its roles and responsibilities were in having this conversation, and his words were, our district has the right, the Board of Trustees and you all have the right, but not the responsibility to initiate these conversations. I'm going to say it again because I just thought it was important the way you put it. We have the right to do it, but not the responsibility to initiate these conversations. So when we come back to that question at the end about what your role is, what as trustees for these as not trustees for the rural elementaries, but as trustees for the high school, what our role is as administrators for the high school, but not the elementary districts, what our role is in these discussions. And I'll just keep going there. Questions on that? Does that make sense? All right, so most of the rest of these slides, we're going to be looking at potential benefits and drawbacks of an organization change, of an annexation, if you will. And the very first thing that we need to think about is the students. That's why we're all here. There's our core purpose up there, high level of learning for all students. And all of these students, I'll go back one slide, whether they reside in the Bozeman Elementary District or any of the other 7 feeder elementaries, are ultimately going to be products of the Bozeman High School District. So one way to look at it is all of these districts' outputs, all of these elementary districts' outputs, their graduating 8th graders are the Bozeman High School District's inputs. They're the kids that ultimately come to our high school district and are ultimately our charge and our desire, and those are the ones that we address a lot of our strategic plan to help. So all the students are ultimately high school students, regardless of the elementary that they attend. The next thing, and we'll spend a little bit of time on this, is there's the potential for lower taxes, and in some cases significantly lower taxes for the district, for the annexing district, without much of an impact on what happens for our Bozeman Elementary District taxpayers. I'm going to go back a couple slides for you here. Again, Bozeman Elementary is significantly bigger in terms of tax base and enrollment, but mostly tax base than these other feeders. So if we were to annex one of these districts, the district to be annexed, the non-blue district, their taxes would end up looking a lot more like ours, like in the blue, and there wouldn't be much change at all to the taxes for the blue taxpayers. Does that make sense? So the district to be annexed, their taxes would change. The Bozeman Elementary taxes probably would not change very much. This is a slide of, and I should tell you a little bit about this data going forward, but this is a slide of all of the taxes levied in fiscal '24 in blue for all of our feeder elementary districts. What was proposed to voters in May of '24 is in red, and then a proposed bond issue for the Montforton School District, which we'll talk about in more detail here in a minute. With regards to a lot of this data that you're going to see, there's a lot of historical data. This is in the past, right? This is 23, 24 levies. This is historical information. We're trying to look forward, but we don't have a clear picture right now of what the future is going to look like, so we have to use a lot of the historical information that we've got. So as we look at this, the Bozeman Elementary District last year levied 77.21 mills. Do you all see that right here? So as you think about this, the district to be annexed would have to vote to make their taxes look more like what's happening in Bozeman. So an example right next door is Cottonwood. They're currently levying 30 mills out at their school district. Are their voters going to vote to have their taxes go from 30 mills up to 77 mills? Is that something that they're probably going to have approved? Are they going to double their taxes? Probably not. It's probably not something very reasonable for them to expect that they're going to want to double their taxes to become part of the Bozeman School District. Same for Gateway, same for Malmberg. Those districts are not likely to vote for annexation simply because their taxes would increase so much. But then you start getting into Lamont. Their taxes last year were 69.44 mills, still lower than what we levy in Bozeman. So I'll show you their details here in a second, but they're probably not going to be voting to annex into the Bozeman School District. Then we turn to Montforton. Montforton this year levied 82.47 mills, so about 5 mills more than the Bozeman School District. So these folks would get a tax break by annexing to Bozeman. I'll show you some real numbers for what it looks like in a second here. But these folks would currently get a tax break if they annex to Bozeman. The red bar, as a reminder, represents what was on the ballot for Montforton this past May, and those taxes were voted down. The Montforton taxpayers did not approve the levy request, but this is the amount that they voted and didn't happen. Montforton has, and we'll talk about this more later, Montforton has a space issue. They're about at capacity at some of their buildings, and they are actively looking for additional places, both land and building, to house their incoming students and to house their growth. This is an estimate of a bond that they had proposed in May of, I believe it was May, 2023. So almost 2 years ago now, I guess a little over one, but 2023. So this is significantly old information. So this is, but I guess the realize is that if the bond were to pass, their taxes would increase significantly. They would already get a tax break if they were to annex to Bozeman, but that tax break would be significant if a future bond were to be approved to address their space issues. Anderson over here on the far left currently has a significant tax issue as well. They're levying about 124 mills compared to our 77. Their taxes are significantly higher. This is the way it's been for many years. And those folks would have a significant tax break if they annex to Bozeman. So what I'm going to do is take a step back from these district-wide views and look at some actual taxpayers, some actual houses within these districts. The first one is Lamont. As you remember, their mills are slightly lower than ours. We've got 4 houses here ranging in value from $680,000 as a market value. Second one into the Home D, which has a market value of $1.26 million. And you see the tax increase that these folks would have if they were to annex to the Bozeman School District. So $70 up to a couple $100 is what their tax increase would be per year. Lamont also had a general fund election in this past year. Home A, their tax impact on that house would have been $67. That election was not approved, so it's reasonable to think Lamont would not approve currently an annexation to Bozeman. So I wanted to show you this information here. I'm going to skip over Lamont going for future slides because I don't think it's reasonable for them to consider this at this point in time, but we can come back to it if you like going forward. Anderson is a different story. You see,
Mr. Waterman, can you
Yeah,
pause
yeah.
for a second?
yeah.
That message is getting in the way of viewing those graphs. So if your trustees on this side, you can move over here or move into the audience chairs and you'll be able to see it better, or it's on your computer. Yeah.
What, should I look here?
There's just a little standby message. We're trying to get it
Okay.
off, but it's in the middle of your graphs.
Oh, okay, all right. Anderson, 6 houses ranging in value from, I think, $888 is Home A, and then Home C is the highest value house at $2,069,000. And you see the tax impact there ranges from, what is that, almost could be $500 a month up to $1,200 a month. And I want you to think about that in terms of the tax impact that we just discussed for the first student vote that you just took. That contract, we figured it was about $1.55, I think, per year per $100,000 of home. So that's for a $1 million home, that's $10 a year. Whereas compared to what we're looking at here of $500 a year, you can see these taxes are significant. Also, Anderson had a general fund election in this past May 2024. $7.51 per year per $100,000 home was the tax impact. That's about $67 per year for House A. So I guess I'm bringing this up because if $67 a year was a no-go for voters in Anderson, then they might have interest in a $500 a year tax savings. Does that make sense? Okay. The next one is Montforton, a little bit more complex, so I broke it down into pieces. As you recall, their taxes are slightly higher than ours are right now. 6 houses again, ranging from about 800, well, I guess 473 is the lowest price house we've got there, 473,000 to about just short of $1.2 million. You see the tax savings for Montforton taxpayers if they were to annex to the Bozeman School District now. $50 a month, somewhere around there, up to maybe $175 a month. So not a huge amount compared to the Anderson taxpayers, but certainly a decent number, especially when you consider that Home A, the tax impact of their general fund election this past year was $97 a month. Sorry, $97 a year. So again, if they said no to increasing their taxes for $97 a year, perhaps they'd be interested in saving an extra $50 a year all the way up, as a minimum. Then when you start looking at the proposed bond, again, these are numbers based on the 2023 election, so well over a year old at this point in time. You see that there's a significant increase in those tax savings multiplied by 10. So instead of $50 a year, you're looking at $500 a year savings, depending on what the bond amount is, depending on how taxes shake out, all those types of things. Don't spend a lot of time with the actual numbers on this just because it's old information. I think the takeaway is the concept stands, is that if there was a bond proposal at Montforton, the taxes that they would save to come to Bozeman via annexation would be a significant number, is the takeaway I would leave you with from there. Questions on that? Compensation. The Bozeman School District, well, I'll just show you some information. We would expect compensation to increase for the employees for the district to be annexed. This past spring, the Montana School Boards Association put out a poll to school districts and it had to do with the quality educator payment. It was for a totally different purpose than this, but I took the information that they had and graphed it. And you can see, well, let me explain it to you. Every line represents a responding district. Every vertical gray line represents one responding district. Bozeman, Anderson, and Montforton are all in the top quartile of paying districts in the state from a base teacher pay perspective. So that's good. We've obviously got high cost of living here, and we've done everything that we can within our respective districts to address that via pay. However, what you're looking at is about a 10% increase to come to Bozeman as opposed to what they're currently able to offer in Montforton and Anderson. That is mostly, I would say, a result of the levies our voters have approved over time. We typically have very supportive voters, while Anderson and Montforton haven't had that luxury up in the past. So I also had a question about from one of the superintendents if this information includes X, Y, Z components of their teacher pay matrix, and it doesn't. I didn't get into any of the details of their pay matrix. I understand that Anderson has a increase if they come in with a master's degree. I didn't do any of that analysis here. I just simply took what was reported by the district to MTSBA and graphed it. So whatever they said is what I graphed. Okay. I'll also tell you that it's my understanding that in Anderson, which is the blue line in here, these are teacher pay numbers from last year, from 23-24. Because their general fund didn't pass, it's my understanding that they had a freeze. Is that right, Casey? On pay at Anderson. That's my understanding. That's teacher base pay. Similar graph for teacher average pay. Again, this is just self-reported by the districts. I don't have any background on any of these numbers. It could mean that teachers in Bozeman have more seniority. It could mean that they have higher education and are further to the right on our pay matrix. I don't know the nature of these other than this is what was reported by the district. These numbers are higher. Our Bozeman Elementary's average pay for teachers is 15% higher than Anderson, which is blue, and 18% higher than what was at Montforton. So if these districts were to annex to us, their teachers would come be a part of our teachers unit and have the benefits and compensation afforded to our staff here as well. I don't have data on classified teachers or administrators or anything along those lines. This is what I had handy, so this is what I'm sharing with you. Also know that this is averages and base pay and those types of things. It's not by any stretch on an individual basis. So I want you to be clear about that. We're talking in generalities here. Okay? Questions on compensation? Capacity issues, and in particular, the Montforton School is closed, and they've have pretty substantial. Or what did I say? It's closed. It's not closed. It's full, and they've got pretty significant efforts underway to find additional space, and those. That space is going to have to come in form of, I would think, additional buildings, and I don't know where exactly that additional building would go, whether it's on land that they currently own or land that they would have to buy. I don't think there's a resolution to that yet. I just know that the search is underway for solutions to their capacity problems. As you know, we've got additional capacity within our buildings, and you also know that we operate most efficiently when we're full. So the graph that I'm showing you here is one that you've seen before. The blue lines represent K-5, and the green lines represent middle school. The solid lines represent our actual and projected enrollment at both of those levels. The blue is K-5 again, green is middle school, and the dotted lines represent our existing building capacity, okay? And we've talked a lot about this, about how, you know, if we wanted to, we could probably close one of our existing 8 elementary schools and still have enough remaining capacity. You recall all those conversations. Currently, we've got additional capacity in our K-5 of 443-ish student spots. Middle school is 213 slots. Montforton enrollment from their OPI reports is 463 and 212 middle school, 675 total. I'm not by any stretch, I don't want you to think that we're talking about closing the Montforton school. That's not the case. I don't think that is even on the table if that district were to be annexed. What I am suggesting to you is that the overflow of that building could fit pretty easily within our existing buildings, and no new construction would be required, nor would we have to incur the cost of new debt, new taxpayer impact for that overflow. And that's what gets back to our boundary discussion that we've been having. If we were to have boundary realignment within the Bozeman School District, it would be helpful if we would know if these districts were going to annex, because that has a significant impact on where students would wind up in attending both K-5 and middle school. Sandy.
When you talk about annexation, is it possible to do a 6-8 annexation and leave the existing rural school K-5 intact? I mean, or is it K-8 or?
That's a great question. I think the answer is it has to be K-8. It's a district. And so there, you have to think of it at the board level is the way it would have to be. So there's a board, you all, with the exception of you, Sandy, represent K-5 and 6-8 middle school. So that would be that's the district that would be annexed. It wouldn't be just pieces and parts of it.
I guess the reason why I asked that is Cottonwood is a K-5 school, and then their 6-8 go to, I think, 3 choices of school, or 2 choices or whatever,
Yeah.
Anderson and Gateway.
That's a great question. We've talked a little bit about with Montforton administration about the ability of them to send their overflow students to the Bozeman School District on a tuition basis, and that's a possibility. That's something we could accommodate. That's something we probably should explore with them at their discretion. The issue is that would increase taxes out at Montfortin further because they'd be paying for those students to come to the Bozeman School District, and it would reduce ours because we would have to use that as tax relief. So it would potentially solve the capacity issue at Montfortin, but it would exacerbate the taxpayer difference and the discrepancy out there.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Thanks for asking. Is there other questions before we keep moving here? Keep chugging? The last two benefit points that I put up there, I don't have any backup slides as far as graphs or anything to show you, so I'm just going to address them up front. So part of state law, there's additional general fund allocations for 6 years if you were to annex a district. So specifically, we would get another basic entitlement for full basic entitlement for 3 years, and then it backs off for the remaining 3 years. So 6 years of additional general fund funding if there was an annexation to occur. So total basic entitlement is about $177,000 under current law. Not enough to make or break anything, but it's additional general fund funding to help you with the transition to that annexation. And the last thing Casey alluded to earlier was there's increased legislative interest in annexation and consolidation. District structure and efficiency is how I put it up there. And a lot of that conversation was led by Representative Jones. He's aware of the fact that if you look at Montana, school expenditures compared to what happens in the nation, Montana has a relatively high cost of administration when we compare school district expenditures here to school districts in other states. That's not because administrators are making a ton of money or we're spending a lot of money on extravagant salaries or anything like that. That's the result of the fact that we've got about 400 school districts within our state. And each one of those school districts has to have a clerk. They have to have a board. They have to do all the reporting. They have to report their finances. They've got to record their board meetings. They've got to do all the things that cost money. So local controls is it's something that we hold very close to home. It's a fundamental value, I think, for a lot of folks in Montana, but it's expensive when it comes to duplication of cost and duplication of effort. His question was about whether we could take some of those duties and share a superintendent or share a clerk or those types of things. My initial thought is that we already do that to the maximum extent that we can. However, it takes just as much time for us to do a budget for a small school as it does to do a big one. In order to eliminate the administrative overhead cost that's duplicated through all of our districts, we'd have to eliminate the work that goes along with that. Casey doesn't have additional free time to monitor another collective bargaining agreement or work with another board, and we don't have the time to do another school's books or anything along those lines. You need to reduce the work before we could reduce the cost to complete that work. Does that make sense? Okay, that's kind of just a list of benefits. Switching gears to drawbacks, the biggest one, and I think everything up there in the benefit category you look at is kind of a left brain thing, right? It's dollars and cents, it's taxes, it's compensation, capacity, those types of things, numbers, left brain issues. The drawbacks you're going to see are just as real and just as important, but they're more right brain type of topics. And the first one and the most important one, the one that we should get on the table, is just the loss of autonomy of the district to be annexed. That district would no longer exist anymore. Their board of trustees would go away. Superintendents, those clerk positions would go away. All of that would be handled by the Bozeman Elementary School District. That's a hard thing for people to talk about. It's an uncomfortable conversation to talk about from my perspective with this microphone in my face that's being recorded. It's a hard thing. And that loss of identity is crucial to to those districts. I would also tell you that we have, if we were to annex, again, I'll just use Montfortin as an example, we couldn't close that building. It would still remain, it would still be full, mostly of kids that are probably currently in Montfortin right now. If you think about all of our K-8 buildings, they've all got their own personality, their own identity, their own sense of value. Hawthorne is known as the School of the Arts, and we see that and the pride that they take in that and the pride that each one of those take under their own identity, even though they're under the purview of one school board. So I would say that there's a little bit of an offset available there. You wouldn't lose your identity, you would lose your ability to make decisions, but you wouldn't lose your identity. You'd lose your ability to think about the teachers and one of the complications associated with that. If we were to truly increase their wages, if the Bozeman School District teacher matrix would afford them more pay, think of the additional work that they would have to do, because each one of those districts can decide on their own math curriculum right now. They don't necessarily have to have bridges. So the teachers that would come into the district here would have to learn all new curriculum in order to fit in with what you all have going on and the decisions that we've made going forward. That's significant, and I don't think it should be understated. Okay, questions on that? Loss of of positions. You know, we've talked about how, you know, there's duplication in administrative level costs. There's people in those jobs, and those are real people with families to support. We would do everything that we could to, you know, absorb them, I think, and help them through. We have administrative turnover, we have central office turnover here all the time. So it could be that it would just be we'd need to absorb some additional costs for the initial couple years of annexation, but there's actual people that this would affect, and I don't want to minimize that either. That said, there's other positions that are vacant. For the last year, the Bozeman School District provided food entrees to Montforton because they couldn't fill a key position within their food service. We're doing that this year for Lamont. So there's a lot of positions that are vacant that we've got the expertise and the ability to absorb without additional costs that would generate additional savings for those schools. Bus drivers, we just talked about, you know, bus drivers. Would we be able to eliminate some routes within these school districts and make things more efficient? Probably. So, you know, we've got some vacant positions that we currently can't fill that we would probably be able to create some efficiencies within. Election approval rates. I mentioned earlier that there's, you know, the Bozeman School District has been very fortunate to have the voter support that we have, and that the rural schools haven't necessarily had that type of support going forward. If those districts were to be annexed, the folks that live within those districts would be annexed to our district as well, and it's conceivable that we could have a higher no vote count in our general fund elections and deteriorate our approval margins even further. This is some numbers from the May 2024 election. You see our top line is our district in Bozeman. We passed with a 57% margin, 1,900 net yes votes. Anderson and Montforton voters both declined their general fund elections. Anderson by 34 votes, Montforton by 128. If those voters were absorbed into our school district, those net no's would count against the yeses that we currently have sustained, and our approval rating could conceivably drop 1% to 1.5%. Is it enough to change the outcome? Probably not immediately, but you've seen also the trends that we've got with our lower approval rates over time. There was one more point I wanted. Oh, the other thing is that one of the things that our district would stand to gain, the Bozeman School District, you might ask what we stand to gain, and maybe one of the things that we would stand to gain from this would be trust, and trust of our taxpayers here locally, that we're looking out for them for the bigger picture, but also perhaps for gain some trust for the folks that were eventually to join under their own decision. Hopefully we'd be able to build that and maybe offset some of this, the no votes, but obviously time would have to tell, and that would be something we could speculate on certainly all day long. Last thing is, I think the last thing, possible change in compensation to a high school district board of trustees. So the way there's 7 elementary trustees on our Bozeman Elementary School Board, and there's 8 on the high school board. And Sandy obviously holds that one position. The way that 8th position is determined is if you divide the tax base. So if you look up here, divide this tax base in blue by the 7 trustees that we currently have on our elementary board, you'll come up with a tax base per trustee. Does that make sense? And then you apply that tax base per trustee to the property, the tax base outside of our elementary district, and round to the nearest integer. And that determines the number of trustees on the high school board. Currently, we've got one extra position because that's how the rounding works out on this. If we were to annex Montfortin and that, I think it was 9%, 8% of their tax base were to become Bozeman Elementary District, the amount of tax base that that high school trustee position would be representing would decrease. And it might be the point that the minimum you can have is one non-voting position on the school board, on the high school school board. So it might be that Sandy's position at worst case would become a non-voting position on the high school board of trustees. Does that make sense? A little bit weird, but that's the minimum according to state law. Oh, and then there's one more point, and that's just challenges regarding boundary changes. Again, bringing it full circle to why this conversation about district structure is being held at this point in time. I'll bring you back to the map. Exploded view. We've got kids living out, say they live out the far end, up to the Madison County border within the Bozeman School District Board of Trustees, or sorry, within the Bozeman Elementary District. Currently, we have to, on this bottom arrow over here, that kid actually gets bused on Norris Road, which is right here, through, this yellow part is the Amsterdam School District, so spends a couple minutes in the Amsterdam District on the bus, and it drives through, keep you coming in on Norris Road till it turns to Huffine, drives through the Montfortin Elementary District, ultimately to come to the Meadowlark School. The boundary issue becomes, if an annexation were to occur, does it make more sense for this kid to come to Montfortin and some of the Montfortin students to come to the into Meadowlark? Again, obviously not a decision that we need to make or should even consider wrestling with right now, but it's just an example of the decisions that would have to occur if an annexation were to occur. Why this conversation about district organization is happening during a School District 7 boundary discussion. I think that was it. So again, benefits, a lot of left brain information up here, a lot of numbers, a lot of taxes, a lot of compensation, capacity issues, a lot of counting type of stuff. A lot of, as far as drawbacks go, a lot of it is more right brain thing. I would just, I would implore you to treat those right brain conversations and people's feelings and the emotions associated with the drawbacks with put just as much weight on those as you do the counting and the quantifiable benefits that we have listed up above. The last slide I have is just those questions for you. Again, and we'll turn you loose here in a sec. I want to ask if you have questions, but we're going to turn you loose with the best and worst outcomes of having these discussions. The reminder that School Board Association says you all have the right but not the responsibility to raise this issue. And then the question is what's the role of the district trustees and administration in these conversations? Then finally, how should the possibility, because nothing has happened, how should the possibility of future annexations factor into our school boundary discussions? I'd like to hear your questions, or Casey's got something before we turn you loose on these.
Chair Neal, I have some colleagues in the room from neighboring districts that I think are here for this conversation. We have lunch coming at 12:30. I guess my recommendation would be that you hear public comment, then we move to these board conversations, and then we break for lunch.
By calling for public comment, you're welcome to come forward. Yes.
Ms. Weather, could you just explain why it didn't make sense to, let's say our 8th grade class is huge and we would like Bozeman to just take on it. I know you spoke to it briefly, but if you can recap on that.
Yeah, so the question, as I recall it, was could Montfortin send students to the Bozeman School District, send your overflow students to the Bozeman School District on a tuition basis? I think that makes sense. I think there's something to be said for that. It would address your capacity issues. What it would also do is increase taxes on your local taxpayers and send that tax money to the Bozeman School District. So it would exacerbate the differences in levied mills between your district and ours.
Would you? Yes. Yeah. Would you like to come forward and give public comment?
Oh, no, that's it.
Okay. Would any of you like to come forward and give public comment? You're welcome to. Yeah. Please state your name and write in your address.
Okay, my name is Sarah Baumgartner, and my question is how many schools, and obviously you guys don't have to answer this now, but how many of the schools that you guys are looking at have actually approached the Bozeman School District to start this conversation? Although I'm not opposed to having the conversation, and I think the point that Mr. Waterman made about change is probably something that is inevitable and we all need to be looking at it. I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all in these situations where you're looking at multiple rural schools, that the obvious solution is to just join Bozeman. I think there should be multiple scenarios put on the table. From the information that you presented, there were a lot of assumptions on the benefits side, and I don't know that all of those can necessarily be as factually stated as presented in the slides. So I think there would need to be some additional research done into what are the actual facts as it relates to decreased taxes and increased salaries, things like that. And I guess my third comment would be I would like to see maybe more proactiveness happening through board conversations, maybe through committee work, through different solutions and scenarios with multiple stakeholders at the table, versus something that I think can get out to the media and to other people in the community without full facts, that can take this meeting as this was, these are factual and actual statements.
I can just quickly, I'll, you might have to remind me of some of the questions. I'm sorry, I can't see you through the pillar here. The question about how many districts have approached the Bozeman School District about annexation, the answer is none. So we're clear about that. Questions about benefits and compensation, and that the information isn't full and complete, couldn't agree more. We absolutely would need to dig into those details and get additional information on that. And remind me of the third question, sorry.
It wasn't a question, it was just a comment and maybe a way to move forward more efficiently.
Board discussions, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I think we're good on public comment. So, all right, did I hear you say we should break for lunch right now before we start the mini consensus process?
I don't think lunch is ready till 12:30.
Oh.
And
so
we're at 12:10. Yep.
So we'll move forward.
So I think we're moving forward on those three questions in your groups. And then again, want to reiterate from the outset that this was brought to you not for action, not for a recommendation, and to really clarify that the BSD7 Board of Trustees can do nothing to initiate this. We heard clearly in the interim budget committee that the legislature will be talking about this. We felt that it was our due diligence to bring you the laws surrounding how annexation happens, consolidation versus annexation, to make it clear that Bozeman School District cannot consolidate. The law doesn't allow that it would only be an annexation conversation if a district were to approach us.
Just to be 100, just to clarify one thing on that, we could consolidate, but only with Belgrade, which I think is a long ways away.
Gary.
Not geographically, but that's a way bigger discussion.
Gary.
Yeah, just have a clarifying question. Could you, if one of the elementary schools requested annex, that was approved, what would the structure of our board look like?
The structure of the elementary board, that's a good question, one I need to research. You wouldn't have more than 7 members on it, but there's state law, and I would need to read it closer about who those trustees are. You all don't represent an area, so there's not a trustee that represents Meadowlark or Irving or Morningstar. You all serve at large. That would continue to be the case, but we'd need some, I'd need to, there's law about it. I could go right to it, but I haven't read it yet, Gary, sorry.
All right. Thank you.
Kevin.
Mike, you mentioned like the tax piece of it, where, for instance, Bozeman, we've done a lot of presentations, but have been very successful, and the Bozeman community supports all types of different levies. One off the top of my head is technology. If those other districts don't have it, then how the original Bozeman taxpayers still pay that, and then the new taxpayers that are coming in, they don't pay that?
Great question. So, for example, the Bozeman Elementary District, I'm trying to think of a good example, has 4 mills approved. Lacey, is that right, for safety, is 4 mills? So that 4 mills would be assessed on the current Bozeman Elementary District taxpayers and the Montforton taxpayers as well. So that may be a decrease, that may be an increase in that particular line item, but over the totals overall were the ones that I showed you. The ones that would be in question would be the bonded indebtedness. There's building bonds that our voters have approved for our 8 elementary districts and 2 middle schools. And there's bonds that the Montforton taxpayers or Anderson taxpayers have approved for their districts as well. So the question would be on that bonded indebtedness. Would it be assumption with bonded indebtedness where all taxpayers would pay all bonds? Or would the Montforton taxpayers or Anderson taxpayers continue to pay just on their bonds and us on ours? I drew it up as everyone would pay on all bonds equally because we'd all be the same district at that point in time.
Bless you. And so for clarification on the objective of what we are about to do here in our small groups, I guess if you could, Superintendent Bertram, just expand on what you're looking for from the trustees.
Yeah, I think it's just a simple conversation in your groups about those 3 questions. So best and worst possible outcomes of local annexation discussions. What is the role of our current trustees in any of these conversations? And how should the possibility of future annexations factor into our boundary discussions? We're not looking to take any action. We feel like this is not, we're providing information today. This is not an initiative for us to move forward. This is not something that we're trying to sell other districts on. We're not trying to initiate annexation conversations with local school districts. We want you to wrestle with the information you had today, talk about it in your small groups. This was more of a knowledge building exercise for current trustees, and we don't have next steps.
Thank you. Any further trustee questions for Mike? Gary?
I just have a comment. I think, I'm glad you brought this forward, because I was at the Constitutional Partner meeting and listened to this conversation that Lou brought up about this. And my personal takeaway from it was that my sense is they're going to move forward in this direction to try and reduce the number of school districts in the state. How that's going to go, I don't have any idea, but I think it's really good for us to at least think about this and have our surrounding schools think about it, not really knowing what really is going to happen, but having these discussions and being prepared about this, I think is a good idea. So, thanks.
Okay, so I would say take some time to fill out the questions and we will discuss. I'll share out what a summary of what I heard at this table for best and worst outcomes of having this discussion. Under best outcomes, we would be prepared for any potential legislative action. Issues will be understood better. Opportunity to gather perspectives. Community transparency. Opportunity for rural schools to join what is the high-quality education in BSD 7. Worst outcomes, misinformation and assumptions, a perception that quality of education would decrease, emotions, working with other boards would be a challenge during that process. Trust. Division and resistance to change.
Melissa, if you caught something that I missed, let me know. But our discussion, best outcomes of the discussion was one, being educated in state law and process, potential impacts to taxpayers. Also, just the clarification that at this time, districts control their own decisions on what they want to do. The worst outcomes is create confusion, misinformation that's involved that BSD 7 is seeking annexation. And then the last one was just the potential thought on the process that's in state law, where that would bring a petition from taxpayers to the boards, and the board would have to work with the petition and go through that process, which might not be the same, might not be the best for kids. Did I miss one?
If there's nothing further for right now, I'm going to gavel us on to a pause for lunch, and we will reconvene. When should we reconvene? Should we take a full hour for lunch, or what? 30 minutes? So it's 12:35. Let's reconvene at 1:05. Thank you.